Welcome to Mooney Reads, and welcome to a slightly different video setup. I'm going to be talking about my top favorite books of 2025, but by way of zine. Last year I started making some bookish zines that I posted on Instagram, mostly about Nonfiction November, and I thought I would continue that on, and just talk about my favorites this way. I've kind of wanted to make zines and stuff like that for a while. I think they're really cool. I was just scared because I'm not artistic. I am not an artist, but this was fun. I think that I thought about the books in a lot of different ways that would have been different from if I were just making graphics. And personally, Canva was pissing me off because it was hard to tell what things were, you know, pre-made or stuff that they got from an artist versus what was AI generated. Paper and pen isn't gonna add AI functions that you don't like, so that's what I went with. Initially, I was gonna try to talk about both of these in one video, but then I started filming and naturally it would have been long as hell. So in this first part, I'm going to be talking about my top fiction of 2025. At the beginning of each of these, I do have a little bit of stats. I've already talked in more detail about stats in a previous video, so if you're interested in that, definitely check it out. Overall, I read 73 books last year, 36 of which were fiction, and then 37 were nonfiction. You can kind of see that genre was a little bit all over the place, and that is reflected in the books that are in my top 6, I think. So starting off, we do have some honorable mentions. First of all, I reread The Hunger Games for the first time since like 2011, 2012. And it still slaps. It actually really does hold up, and I'm super excited to get to the rest of the series. Other notable books: Her by Cherry Muhanji and Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit by Jeanette Winterson. These are both backlist lesbian books. Her is focused on the lives of Black women in 1950s Detroit. This particularly focuses on a newlywed 17-year-old who is moving into the family home of her husband. And it looks at relationships between Black women in general, looks at how she relates to her mother-in-law, as well as her kind of coming into her queerness as she explores the city. Meanwhile, Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit focuses on a girl who is being raised in a very religious household. Or at the very least, her mom is kind of a religious fanatic, and so it's very much talking about religious trauma, but also a lot of hypocrisies within certain religious communities. Both of these are kind of surreal, and Her in particular kind of plays with time in a certain kind of way. Both are really excellent. Icebreaker by A.L. Graziadei, which is YA, focusing on two college students who are top picks for the NFL draft. And so they have kind of a rivalry, but they're on the same team. So it's kind of a romance, but I really liked that you also got to see into the friendship. And I've got to say, this book also gets bonus points for actually teaching me something about a sport, because I feel like I understood hockey a little bit better by the time I finished the book. I'd actually been meaning to read Icebreaker for a really long time. Alex from Pucks and Paperbacks, this is one of his favorites, and he'd recommended it to me, I don't even know how many years ago, but I am so glad that I finally got to it, because it was really good. And I feel like this has happened with more than one sports romance, just because, like, I'm not really a sports person, so I go in kind of assuming that that's going to be kind of a weird point for me, and they end up really surprising me in a positive way, and this was definitely one of those. I Feed Her to the Beast and the Beast Is Me is also YA, but this one is horror. It was so good, very intense. If you like a morally gray man character, this is one for you for sure. This is about a ballerina. She's in a Parisian ballet school, which is already cutthroat. I would also, I would argue that ballet is just as much of a sport as hockey is. It's performance-based, but it is just cutthroat, intense, and highly athletic. But anyways, the ballerina makes a deal with a river of blood in order to get where she wants to go. So it's really intense. There's a murder mystery involved. And it also looks a lot at racism within the ballet in particular. This one has a sequel, which I have not read, but I'm really looking forward to it, and we'll probably reread this before I actually get to that one. And then the final sort of honorable mention that I have is Bellies by Nicola Dinan, which is literary fiction that focuses on two people who are in a relationship, and it looks at how their relationship shifts and how they grow as people. This was a really beautiful story, and I really like some of the particular insight that this author gets to is just really good. This was one of my reads from earlier in the year, so I don't remember a ton of the details necessarily, but I did have a really strong reaction to it, and it was one of those that delves into the characters really well, which is really what I value a lot in books, or character and theme. So from there, we can actually get into my top 6. Starting with Dead Collections. This was a literary fiction that focuses on a trans vampire who secretly lives in the archive that he works at. And within this story, you learn that vampirism is more of a medical condition, so it's not like necessarily vampire in your traditional horror sense of the word. But this is kind of looking more at disability than at any horror angle. And he ends up meeting this person who is bringing to the archives works of their deceased wife. And they end up sort of bonding over this. And what I really loved about the relationship within the book is it's T for T, and it looks at how gender and intimacy intersect in a really interesting way. This book also looks at grief and loss in a really interesting way. I also appreciated the niche fandom references. There's even like kind of a made-up fandom within this that it sort of references, which is just perfect for me personally. From the reviews that I saw, this is sort of a Marmite read. Like, there were some people who loved it, and then some people who really disliked it. And I think it came down to a couple of things. One of them was the advertising of the book. I think a lot of people assumed it would be something different from the cover, instead of it being kind of a little more lit ficky. And I also think that it's written in a very particular way. It's a little bit off kilter, and I don't know how to describe that more. But I feel like the way that it is written is just so perfect for what the book is. And I also think that some of the issues or imperfections that the character contends with, I think some people didn't read in the best light. Like, he sort of talks about his own internal biases and things of that nature as the book goes on, which I really appreciated. And I like how it was done, especially since it was written in the retrospective. But anyways, I love this one. At number 5, we move to young adult with Sasha, Masha by Agnes Borinsky, which was really one of those books where not a ton happens. Our main character is a teenager who is coming into understanding their gender. You're very much looking at some of their kind of day-to-day interactions with friends, getting into a relationship, meeting queer people, like queer community for the first time. There's some really nice stuff about queer community in here. And I think it gets at some of the details of more dissociative experience of gender dysphoria for some people, myself included. And also how some of that, both being closeted and experiencing dysphoria, can impact romantic relationships in particular. I just really loved how this was written, how we could sort of see inside this person's head at this particular moment in time. This isn't a coming out story, it's a coming into self story. And I really loved it, and I'm super excited to see what else this author is going to put out. Now, the next two are both by the same author, so I might talk about them a little bit out of order just because of how I read them. So, at 4 and 5, we have Hell Followed With Us by Andrew Joseph White and You Weren't Meant to Be Human by Andrew Joseph White. They're both horror, but Hell Followed With Us is YA, whereas You Weren't Meant to Be Human is actually his adult debut. And I do think this is very important because while they are definitely both definitively horror and not for people who are squeamish when it comes to blood, You Weren't Meant to Be Human is definitely more intense, which probably sounds like a wild thing to say if you've read Hell Followed With Us, because there's definitely cannibalism in Hell Followed With Us. There's definitely people turning into creatures, bodies everywhere. But You Weren't Meant to Be Human, I think, just deals with a lot more intense subject matter. I'm rambling. Focus. Hell Followed With Us. A trans man at the end of the world. His mom is the cult leader who is causing the end of the world and wants to turn him into a monster for the apocalypse. At the beginning of the book, him and his dad are escaping, and he ends up finding a group of queer teens, and it's kind of his adventure. Adventure makes it sound way too lighthearted. It's his journey kind of through this. You Weren't Meant to Be Human, also kind of apocalypse adjacent. There's definitely a lot of political stuff happening that is kind of what current United States is, but like push forward even more in terms of like transphobia, climate catastrophe. But we're focused in on a trans guy who is in a cult that's tapped into the hive mind of this weird alien bug thing that we don't really get a name for. He ends up getting pregnant by his abusive situationship person. I wouldn't even say boyfriend, and is forced to bring the pregnancy to term. So in this, you're seeing a lot of the stuff going on in his head. There's a lot of body horror that's adjacent to the pregnancy, and also some stuff outside of that. It talks a lot about trauma in different ways. Like I said earlier, character is really the big thing for me, character and theme. And both of these have theme. I mean, the characters in Hell Followed With Us are good, but I really found You Weren't Meant to Be Human even more kind of interesting in that way, kind of peeking into kind of who this character is. And then we get to number 2 and number 1, going way far away from the land of horror. We start out with some literary fiction. Crawl by Max Delsohn, which is literary fiction that focuses different transmasculine people at various points of transition, dealing with different parts of life. There are a lot of themes around community. There is some stuff around class. It starts out with a short story about a guy who's learning to cruise for the first time. So there's a lot on relationships in various ways, a little bit on discourse that is ever present. And And one thing that I thought was really neat about this, one through line through most of these stories, is the place of Seattle. And I really like that that's like a common reference point throughout this. They definitely do seem like similar people, like they're all transmasculine. Some of them you are seeing kind of before they kind of realize that. So they're at that time like out as lesbian, but they do have their own kind of character. Like, even though they are similar, they still have their own thing going on, certainly. And the thing that I really loved about this was how compelling it was. Like, I really felt like as soon as I finished one story, I really wanted to start the next one, which is sometimes hard to do with short story collections, at least for me. Like, sometimes it can almost feel jarring to go from like one thing to the next, or you want to spend more time in one. But I was just really interested to see what else we were going to be looking at, really. And then finally, we have my number one, Wherever's Your Heart by Anita Kelly. This is a butch for butch romance novella. The main characters are a trucker and a bartender. The thing that I really loved, I loved several things about this. Obviously, it's my number one. But this was a novella, a romance novella that managed to feel like a slow burn. This truck driver has been kind of going to this bar over and over again over the years, and then kind of finally sort of shoots her shot with the bartender. I really love the music references in this. This is actually a part of the Moonlighters novella series. I read all three of them over this past year, and this one was definitely my favorite. Although the first one was also pretty good. But this just stuck out to me as something really sweet and wonderful. So it just had to be my number one. So there's it for fiction. I think it's notable that all of these, not the honorable mentions, but all of my top 6 were authored by trans people, trans and non-binary people. And only one of them didn't focus on trans characters. So that's cool. There's just a lot of good stuff happening there. And even if you look, including my honorable mentions, I think the only non-queer book in kind of my whole favorites list was The Hunger Games. So that wraps up my top fiction of 2025. And this video. Definitely come back for the second part to see what all I enjoyed in terms of nonfiction. But let me know if you've read any of the books that I mentioned here. And let me know what your favorite read of this past year was. Thank you all so much for watching. Bye.